Okay, welcome to Chapter 1 of Applied Cross-Cultural Psychology, PSYC 379. This chapter is going to be on understanding cross-cultural psychology. So this is a little bit of an overview. But before I get started, I did want to just add a special thanks to Eric Sharev and David Levy, who not only co-authored the primary textbook for this course, but also were generous enough to provide some additional resources. A lot of the PowerPoints are going to be heavily relying on resources that they were able to provide. And I'll just add that Dr. Sharev is also an adjunct professor at George Mason University, so you might have the opportunity to take a course with him in the future. So before we get started, there's a couple of key terms that I wanted to highlight. Culture is essentially referring to the way that certain groups live their lives, think, or behave. And groups share culture based on any number of characteristics or qualities like nationality, language, ethnicity, gender, disability, or sexual orientation. There's several different elements of culture. There's what we refer to as objective elements. Examples of this might be architecture, clothing, food. And then there's more subjective elements of culture, things like values, beliefs, norms, attitudes, and worldviews. So every individual has been socialized with a number of messages from different cultures based on their intersections of personal identities. So take a look at the picture on the screen and consider how these different aspects of you play a role in your life. Another term that I want to talk more specifically about is cross-cultural psychology. So this is the exploration of psychological phenomena across cultures, looking at how behavior, emotions, personalities, cognitions, and mental health may vary across cultures. So research in this field tests cultural parameters of psychological knowledge and involves participants of more than one cultural background. The reason why this is important is because there's an increasingly diverse population in the US, and it's important to think about what might be some of the benefits, risks, and consequences of having a lot of cultures that are located in a relatively small geographic area. We know that human behavior may vary a lot depending on culture, and so it's important to take that into consideration when you're working with a bunch of different populations or you're working in a community that has a lot of diversity in it. So you can't necessarily generalize cultural specific knowledge, and when the goal of research is to have accurate knowledge, then it's really important that you take into consideration how your findings may or may not apply to different people within the community or between communities. So this is a comparative field, and any study in cross-cultural psychology draws its conclusions from at least two samples that represent at least two cultural groups. Because cross-cultural psychology is about comparisons, and the act of comparison requires a particular set of critical skills, then this study is inseparable from critical thinking, which is going to be a very, very critical part of this course. So here's three additional key terms. I'll let you read these different terms yourself, but we're looking at race, ethnicity, and then what nation you're from or your nationality. This is just a kind of smattering of some of the racial categories that can be found in the United States. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive sample. There's going to also be people that are multi-ethnic or multiracial, and that should also be taken into consideration and really considered when you end up designing any type of research or applying any type of research findings to a population that you might be interested in or working with. I also just wanted to include this little table that can also be found in the book that's talking about how diversity and different populations might change over time. So there's an estimate for people in 2010, and then there's a different population estimate predicting what the United States will look like in 2050. So it's also important to think about scientific knowledge versus popular beliefs, in cross-cultural psychology. So scientific knowledge is accumulated through research, systematic empirical observation, and evaluation of a wide range of psychological phenomena. Facts are obtained with the help of scientific research methodologies and rigorous verification by multiple sources. So this requires multiple studies and oftentimes very large sample sizes. This, of course, might vary depending on the availability of a population to actually have research conducted with them, as well as their interest in participating research. Popular beliefs, though, are everyday assumptions about psychological phenomena. Such assumptions are often expressed in the form of beliefs, evaluation, or prescriptions. Ideological or value-based knowledge is a consistent set of beliefs about the world, the nature of good and evil, right and wrong, and the purpose of human life. All of this is based on certain ongoing principles or central ideas. Legal knowledge, encapsulated in the law and the details and rules and principles related to psychological functioning of individuals, these are commonly established by legal authorities, but they are expected to be enforced throughout a society. So the impact of knowledge on culture and behavior, we've got these different types of knowledge that we've just defined: popular, ideology, scientific, and legal, and these are going to shape a culture, which is then going to impact individual behavior. So another key term is traditional culture, and this is used to describe cultures based largely on beliefs, rules, symbols, and principles. These are established predominantly by a culture's history. They're confined in local or regional boundaries. Oftentimes, they're restricting behaviors, thoughts, or what's expected to be felt, and mostly intolerant to social innovations. And this is just kind of general key bullet points for what's considered to be a traditional culture. A non-traditional culture is a term used to describe cultures based largely on modern beliefs, rules, symbols, and principles. In a non-traditional culture, some key bullet points to describe this might be relatively open to other cultures, absorbing and dynamic, science-based or technology-driven, and relatively tolerant to social innovations. Power distance is the extent to which the members of a society accept that power in institutions and organizations distributed unequally. Uncertainty orientation is the common ways in which people handle uncertainty in their daily situations and their lives in general. And the uncertainty avoidance is the degree to which the members of society feel uncomfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. So another way that we might talk about cultures, and these are setting up fairly dichotomous kind of categories that may or may not really encapsulate an entire culture, but another way of thinking about culture is whether they're a collectivism culture or an individualism-focused culture. Collectivism is looking at complex behavior based on concerns for people, traditions, and the values that they share together. Individualism, in contrast, is complex behavior based on concern for oneself and one's immediate family or primary group, as opposed to concern for other people or for other groups to which one belongs. So the emphasis is on the group as a whole and the role that individuals play to help maintain the group, as opposed to a focus on individual or those that directly affect the individual. And then you can further define this by vertical collectivism or horizontal collectivism. I'm not going to just read through everything on this slide. You'll have the opportunity to do that as well as through reading the book. But cultures, I will just add a little bit of additional information, and that is that cultures measured high on embeddedness regard the family or extended in-group rather than the autonomous individual as the key social unit. Embedded cultures focus on the welfare of the in-group and limit concern for outsiders' well-being. So this means that the more embedded the culture in a country, the less people would be expected to help strangers. Embedded cultures emphasize restraint of actions that might disrupt in-group solidarity or the traditional order. So this is a little bit of additional information on cultural syndromes, which is a pattern or combination of shared attitudes, beliefs, categorizations, definitions, norms, and values that is organized around a theme and shared by people in a particular culture. So cultural syndromes include things like tightness, cultural complexity, and honor. And at this point, I'll give you, you can pause the PowerPoint or the audio in order to read the definitions more thoroughly. So there are 4 cross-cultural psychology approaches that we're going to be talking about: evolutionary, ecocultural, sociological, and cultural mixtures. Here's the definition for the evolutionary approach. Here are the definitions for the sociological and ecocultural approaches. And finally, this is looking at an integrative approach, where psychological phenomena studied in cross-cultural psychology reciprocally interacts with activities, so the individual's goal-directed interaction with the environment. And then there's additional interactions between culture and the resources and access to those resources, how that impacts the activities that people engage in. Okay, so that is the end of the Chapter 1 PowerPoint. At this point, I want to remind you to post on the discussion board and make sure that you also respond to somebody else's post. You'll also need to go ahead and take the Chapter 1 quiz at some point before the deadline. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and good luck, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the course.